Chili here with Serious Stylist Moon. This is Soul Hour, ascended next to Beta per se, and that's a good time to check if Algol is minima today. Moon is a degree away from Deneb Algadi. It's 22 and is why I don't make a talisman just yet. But I believe by the time that the midheaven next to gets next to Deneb Algadi, I might concentrate something if it's a fine hour. So let's say if Algol is minima. Um, yeah. Things I want to talk about. Well, as a person has midheaven Mula in Jupiter sign, which trines my lot of union around Maga, I was thinking about the notion that of transmuting the issues of Magha. And one of the things that I see with the moon casts, because in like Vedic traditions, the moon would be associated with the caste a person in. And it's fascinating observing this as a person who doesn't come from the culture, because I can think about my childhood and how, let's say, my Moon Nakshatra associated with merchants and clergy plays out. Like I was around spiritual teachers. I was thinking about renditing like the scriptures when I was young. Um, and it does play a role in my life, and I have Uranus indeed in Sagittarius tropically, which means revolution around philosophy, religion, and the Jupiter in Capricorn, traditional one, Saturn in Scorpio. What about the traditional one? Well, ritual abuse, which is the rape that is done, and Jupiter also rules children, um, and how that affects um, basically uh, everything. So, but in chart of woman, first of all, what I think about castes, because I think that in a religion, if I think about Rendit in a religion, which is a part of the role of the clergy, this is the basis upon which people will base their judiciary systems. Right now in Israel, they think to do religious judiciary system, and um, and it's almost forcing people like me into our role, because we can't have judiciary system that would cause the Holocaust. The Talmud, many phases in the Talmud were quoted by the people that persecuted the Jews, and rightfully so. So if the change comes from within, then we're not going to go through extinction, conversion, and essentially, the people who converted to the Protestantism, or even to Islam, then that they were remembered as colonizers. The Islamic people are also colonizers. Um, yeah. So she gonna be. We're gonna have an eclipse today. So it's a great thing that I'm talking about this right now, because Beta per se eclipsing really denotes the things to do with whatever is wrong about honoring the feminine. An eclipse would create the disaster. So, hello there. Of course, Soul Hour. Sun ruling my sixth house natally, and my pet come here. Hi. Um, when I think about caste system, I think about slavery, which also exists in Judaism, and that's a no-go. um, although in Vedic tradition we have a Shiva and Shakti, Um, and there is no equivalent in Judaism. Eve is not Lilith. Eve became Lilith, and then everybody will cast out of heaven. We don't have orgasmic birth in Judaism. And if we don't have orgasmic birth, we do not have continuation to our lineages. If I think about my family, my biological family, biological, okay? My mama has hallux valgus. I saw pictures of my biological father. He was sitting with me as a baby. And then he was at home, so he was barefoot. And his toe also was like mine. This causes, and I know both cases, grandmothers, they married young. So young, in fact, that my grandfather had to write a different date to my grandmother to make it look like she was older. Ashkenazi. It's in our cultures, it's in our bedrooms. And that affects the fascia, and it affects the lymph systems. And this is something that affects fertility. And so and yet our populations are worried about underpopulation. Although my father's my biological father, I don't know how many kids there were there, but there were quite some. And then he had a lot of kids. And my father, their family had 6, 7 brothers and sisters. So my mama had me. My father, I think, has one girl. I don't know if he has more children. And I paid attention, if my mother paid attention to marry with love and to have children with love, then I pay attention also to the particles of it, which is orgasmic birthing, which is orgasmic conception. And indeed, the lineages where there would be something close to child weddings. By the way, about my biological father, he was younger than my mom. And so, as per his tradition, he would have already been in an age where, like, okay, when you're going to get married. But in terms of chronological, my mother birthed me around her Saturn maturation. And my father would have been just in his Uranus square. So usually it's opposite. And then for me, I was looking at it in terms of outer planets to inner planets, because people with outer planets too, let's say the Venus, the ruler of the seventh, or even me that have Uranus in Jupiter's sign. Jupiter is the airman. So and that can't go with. Now I'm going to get to that, but and how it plays out for many people's charts, because I would already pay attention to the conception, the birthing, the sensuality. There is no sexuality there's good sexuality. And with caste system, if is slavery, what I care about is not caste system in the sense that all different moons are pointing to different things, because I see naturally that I grew outside of caste system, and I see that the things that they say about my moon nakshatra caste is true. What I don't agree with is that what people consider lower castes, first of all, I don't agree with is higher caste and lower caste. And this is when I think about culture, philosophy, and religion, which is eventually judiciary and tradition. Then, if the people, with even in lower castes, even if they even live lower, so to speak, there is something off with the and I have Pluto in the ninth house tropically, so something off with when we think about recycling and we think about energy that doesn't die but only transmutes. Then there's something off. People are gonna have mold. People are gonna have fungi. Um, whether it's in the houses or in the soil or in the teeth or um, time for tea. No, recording, recording. And here is another example because yin is rest, and talking about these things requires a restful composure. Um, so think about when, let's say, when the father is helping with the things in the house, then the woman, the mother can rest. But at the same time, creating that rest um, is very important. Even when we are women, it's honoring the feminine. So when I think about any sort of lower caste, higher caste, it causes mold. Or when I think about not even having respect for the feminine, and the Jews would say, no, it's a matriarchal society, and we honor the woman, and the husband has to please his wife, and so on and so forth. Can she say no? Now, in many traditions, even the rabbinical institution, sometimes a woman would go to them because they would allow divorce better custody rules than the secular courts. But sometimes they would have right to say no, she cannot divorce. This is rape. It is rape. Catholic wedding in general. I know a man who was Catholic, who was Christian, but Catholic, and he said he was wanting to be very flexible. He said, if we marry, I don't care whatever you want. I just want for me even 5 minutes at church. And it's a reasonable request, except that it's a Catholic church. And this is where renditing our religions and scriptures, because this is the rules. I come from country Israel, but my mother country is also Netherlands. And in Netherlands, one of the reasons that fiascos like a COVID were possible because the rules used to make sense. It's kind of like the rules make sense until they don't. And so think about families of 6, 7 children. The the rules were a way to create order in society that allows for life, or allows for, think about the schedule. In Netherlands, you don't just meet a person. Um, they have a schedule and it creates space. If you think about the Saturn of Aquarius, it's creating a space. Even in COVID was terrible. All the countries were looking like North Korea. But the teachers had only 5 groups of children people became aware that the space of living needs to contain them. If they can live in a small space, but they need to have land. They need to have garden that they can go out to. They need to have a place where they can take a morning walk. And if it's locked down, then they have to take a morning walk somewhere. They have to maintain their health. And this is where the rules became no longer making sense. But in normal conditions, the rules were a way that people could maintain their own space within a rather crowded society. It's not the Aquarius of United States, because United States has vast land. And wait, no, I'm recording. Okay, not like that. Please, later everything. Susie, later I need to go out. Okay. Yes, I will not allow people to take the anger. The anger is very right because they don't have enough space. They don't have enough land. My mother is very connected to the land. She needs to have her own land. If she doesn't have her own land, she gets mad, and she's right to get mad, but I'm not right to stay within madness. Now, when we talk about, let's say, when we talk about the life between people, because everybody worried about the population. The fact that they're worried about the population or the fact that they're worried about being underpopulated is not, they want to maintain the culture, want to maintain the lineage, they want the continuity. Continuity cannot be without facilitating orgasmic birth. It is not a pleasure to bring children, because you see, to grow children, even pets. We have 3 kittens, and my mama loves them, but every day it's like, maybe they should go out, maybe this, maybe that. It was with me too. And I was the most comfortable child. When my parents get invades my space, because their closet is there, makes a big mess, and I just go out. But this is exactly the issue. Where the birthing and conception, it affects the children, affects the nature of the relation. And when society is worried about being underpopulated, first of all, we think, oh, they have to think about caring for the children. They have to think about aligning to the closest to orgasmic birthing. Now, it's not about blaming for women, because if they take it to degrading the feminine again, they will create Holocaust for them. They will create colonialism. And I'm not talking about, people think, oh, colonialism, Africa. No. We are approaching at the times that the Jews converted to Protestants, which escaped from the Catholic Roman Church, that escaped from the Islam. And ask Suriname and Indonesian people how they felt about Dutch colonialism. When I went to school in Israel, they taught us Dutch colonialism was the worst. But these people escaped all the inquisitions. They were, and then they sailed the freaking North Sea with 45% rate of return to go to Suriname and to Indonesia. So And that was the inspiration for the foundations of United States, because Vogue or Dutch East India was company that was traded and had a life insurance for the missus, because men had 45 rate of return. Don't laugh, mama cleans the house, I need to get out. Boker tov. um, I went out barefoot, but I went out. So um, yeah, but this is also where we think about the cultures that did not even talk about these things. They don't have concept, even the myths for women, they don't have any, what, because for women, if woman was sensual, they would trade it, they would traffic women. And so woman can't be sensual. And they have to keep the woman not being connected to her sensuality at home, so that there would be market for the trafficked women. But it's true. It is true. I know, because after the Me Too, I said, why am I going to complain about a man that needs to heal from their trauma? Why not say, well, what about the sexuality that I do want, the relations that I do want, and promote that? And so I did. Not only I put my money where my words were. I invested in a business, in a course that would align with what is more tantric sexuality, but without the spiritual background around it. With international business of Israel, they came from Australia, Efrat Wolfson. But they had also position for salespeople. I say, yeah, this is something that I believe in, and I went and joined the sales team. What would happen later would be ritual abuse, or to isolate me, because it pinpointed to right exactly the thing. I paid attention that the sales method, because a new business, there was no model, so business owner working with entrepreneurial models, she tries things first before she judges, and I saw the business model was not compatible with, or the sales model not compatible with situation of women that never connected to the yes, no, and maybe, and so to close a deal, which necessitates connecting to the yes, no, and maybe, required a lot, and required also for my healing. Um, and also with the choice, we would ask them about their fears and so on, and then for the sale was supposed to be, are you going with your fears, or are you choosing yourself? And I'm like, no, 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 not compatible with will and consent. I identified it. The women around me, they were kind of like identifying it, but shy about it, and it shows all of where we stand with our sexuality. I stood for this before any Me Too. I stood for this when I was at sales at a credit card company. And thereby, I did not comply with the credit fraud. Also show us there's no credit fraud when there's no rape. So what makes credit frauds? Rape. Now when we bring occult, we say rape is occultistic, then we bring a mind control, the consciousness goes but out of the body, The people are most susceptible to mind control. Of course, ladies, you can't find your husband when Mary Magdalene was not protected. She was the closest to that gnosis, and yet it was still a crucifix. It was still around salvation. In fact, the Lutheran Church said that salvation is just by the faith. That was the contribution of the Protestants. So one interpretation of the salvation being by the faith and not by growing to torture, it was always by the faith and not by good deeds. Unfortunately, this was translated to, if you think about the Jesuits, to crucifixion, for the rituals that they go to, which is ritual abuse. And this makes the people not residents in their own bodies. It affects relation, because the people feel like guests even in their own country. Now, there's nothing wrong with traveling. Is not compatible with continuation of the lineage, because transitions of death and life are important. And when the people, now of course there were reasonings, or the climates that people lived, or the rates of death that people dealt with, and the concern for the continuation of the lineage. And in that situation, the people, but here is the thing. They would not go extinct had they honored the feminine. But if not, entire humanity is in risk of extinction. Even respect to the elders deteriorates when feminine is not honored. Why? To what respect? To the father that was with the very young child, that everybody don't want them to. It creates disgust, and that can create contempt rather than respect. I had transmuted years of disgust in my lineage. That's lying there, like almost like a corpse, with those rhodonite crystals. and and allowing with the feelings of literally disgust that were not even my feelings. Of course, such things do not contribute to orgasmic birthing, to sensual, to pleasurable, to joy of living, to love. And this is also something that provokes a lot. Now, this provocation, it only comes when people are beginning to worry about the lineages. They worry about continuation. They worry about being underpopulated in the face of. In Netherlands, we had been, people had been worried about what type of cultures come to Netherlands. But then the femicide is not only with these cultures. It exposed the certain things that the women from over there and the women from Netherlands all need to deal with. because the women from over there escaped the Netherlands to the Netherlands to be treated better. I know I also escaped in COVID. Half Israeli, half Dutch, escaped to the Netherlands. And indeed, for this woman, I was treated better for a while. But not all women were treated that way. And then it came a femicide. I was not in Netherlands anymore later. And this pertains to the real estate, pertains to the housing, pertains to all of these things that none of the three religions promotes, but happen also in the three religions with a sacrifice. And when do people sacrifice? Before they build something. But the first thing they build is the real estate that is free of tax, which is the monastery or the religious institution in real estate, which is literally creating a frequency around the entire building. If some of y'all have been to certain churches or whatever religious institutions and felt weird, that's that. It affects the religion that is practiced as well, but the religion that is practiced is a part of these practices. Uranus in my fourth house. Uranus releases us from things of the lineage, things to do with housing, motherland. And the ruler and sign of real estate, there is the sovereignty in the house. Now here's a situation. I came out of my room because my space was violated, but also my mother feels like her space is violated. I cannot just rent an apartment but the culture is still a culture that doesn't honor the feminine, which means the sovereignty of the house. Now either the woman had to be the master of the house, and then everybody came out of the house. It's also, for many of us, is how we came out of the house, boys and girls. And then at work, we could not be, ruled upon. We escaped that at home. And our parents escaped that, so they were like, they're building a house. If it's single mothers, they need their space, so we need our space now. Because the emotional needs are not met adaptively, sensing for food, then what happens? Children go out of the house, the parents goes right after them. They need this space, but they don't know to be alone because they never learn togetherness in a way that is actually nourishing. But people may have that with their mothers, with their fathers, whatnot. There was a time it was trendy to be a stay-at-home dad. Like there are a lot of, with feminism, we had dads that were stay-at-home dads. So it's both a relational issue, but the things that govern, like the religion, like the philosophy, like the laws, written and unwritten, are affected by and affecting this. And so when I was thinking today about the teachings that came to me about relationships, which were that the couple, or whichever type of relationship, is they think about the bigger mission they do together, not because they're missionaries. This teaching is because I have Jupiter in 10th house, and midheaven Mula Nakshatra, trining my lot of union and Magha. This is why Peter ring drops when people try to pressure me to date, and a Peter ring drops. People talk about overpopulation. Goedemorgen. People talk about the overpopulation and about they wanting to double the population. I say, okay, what about orgasmic birthing? They should invest in the herbs and the medicine and orgasmic birthing and connecting one own sexuality, be able to say yes and no, having the trajectory of the children's children granted. And that can only be if we change our scriptures, because a subjugated, if I try to control the man, he will become infertile. But, but same with the women. Now, with this infertility, it's almost, people pay attention to things that they didn't pay because it becomes the first frontier. So my mother, that had this hallux vagus, birthed with my biological father, which also had hallux vagus. But he was the younger one. He was going through his Uranus square. And by the way, his Uranus square would be from Sag. That would be me. I am my dad's Uranus square. And so, and for my mother, it would be Saturn return, Saturn maturation. The Saturn maturation would be with Saturn in Scorpio. She has Saturn in Virgo. And what was Saturn maturation would have been is my birth. Now, for her, she had to insist on birth with love, not with IVF, with cloning, and so on and so forth. And whatever the issues that created or and resolved, then kind of like it is what it is. So the Israel's worry about being underpopulated were created. My parents really wanted to have children. It was not an issue with them. But it created the fact that they were looking at the fertility of the woman, but never checking the fertility of the man. And even then, there's also moon compatibility. None of the moon of my parents are compatible. But then what do we learn with these conflicting issues around fertilities, which is incompatible moon nakshatras? Wow. Around the navel, around creation, around children, is that, well, also the birthing and conception that need to be aligned. For that, we need to honor the children, and also when people come to puberty, to have the teachings that are important of embodiment. Sorry. Yeah, people are not used to have boundaries set to them around the neighborhood, but it's not like they respect women so much. If they would, probably response would be different. And it's a vibe. Does a woman have to go protective? Or can a woman walk relaxed? This is a question of whether people feel at home in the motherland. And if at home at conception was not enough rest, then people feel unruhig, they feel unsettled. And here, I'm not talking about cases Yes, I haven't mentioned like gruesome cases or something like that. No, parents that chose to have children from love. But a society also have to support that. And then the awareness. And now everybody's been provoked because when we talk about these things, it goes to the conception of every child. But the alternative is to kill the children and then have discontinuation. Whereas trafficking is discontinuation because it's the money that this industry is making is of making sure that nobody has orgasmic birthing, right? Because if who will be the client of those industries that are trafficking and torturing the people? If the families are doing well, and what if the nation's economy relies on that, or the nation's intelligence relies on that? And so everything stays dysfunctional, and then people naturally, with the problems in Netherlands, when I was in Netherlands, and I had a conversation with the municipality, and she says, "Are you going to stay in Netherlands?" And I say, "If I'm treated well." Like, I'm being honest. I'm not going to lie to her because I just left a household that was not optimal. And in COVID, another household got not optimal. Whether it's living with roommates or not, but it's either way. Somebody could be your best friends. When it's violent, they become roommates. It's a relational issue. It's a relational issue. Now, here is the thing. If people have to run out of home, all the people start to try to honk at them. As they see a person barefoot, they want to take advantage of them. And then people have combat at home and combat outside. Nothing that creates orgasmic birthing, union, conversation, connecting with the feminine, flirtation. In this society, of course, is discontinuation of the lineage. But to create homes that are continuing the lineages, we can't go with this type of control, subjugation, and things that create mold. Things that create is practices. Um, it's like everybody's fighting everybody rather than having harmonious relations. And it feels like a home. The home needs to be a home. People at societies where people that run away from a house that is not optimal. I'm not talking dysfunctional, not dysfunctional. What is dysfunctional is both within and outside. But we can't change it within without the change in the outside. If a person doesn't have a space to move to where it's safe, and also if the moving out of the house is by this big explosion,
A person cannot anymore. But whereas naturally there was the desire and the inclination to have one's own space. And the individuation process was terrifying. But then people try to move out and they meet a society that wants to overpopulate by rape. And that's the very thing that's going to subject them to a series of inquisitions. The Jews converted to Calvinism or to Protestants. The Protestants escaped the Catholics, or the Catholics, they escaped the Islam. And all of these people, all of them suffered. And the people who were colonized by Dutch also suffered. The Americans that were inspired by that. And the native people in the United States also suffered. And United States American also suffered. And every place has people that want to immigrate to them. Even I take a look at Iceland. Parents and families, they did so much in relations with the family. I see people from Uganda saying, what cultural shocks are in Iceland? And I say the children talk to their parents. This is why colonialism happens, because of this blending of cultures. Because this lady from Uganda, if she would grow children, or if she wants her own household, she would not grow her children exactly like Uganda. Maybe not exactly like Iceland. He said in Uganda, children don't talk to their parents. Now also I remember in Israel, I worked at the insurance company. The father of the business, he used to make food for us, everything. So we had different ways of showing respect. For me, where I come from, showing respect is to speak the truth. To speak the truth of how I feel is something reserved only for people I really, really respect. Because it means I have faith in the person. For them, it was considered to talk back. Fortunately, they understood these differences of culture. Now, behind these differences of culture are extortion cults, because what is this wedding to the children and so on and so forth? Is because the children were used in extortion cults. The children were trafficked, and then it was not normal already to conceive the feminine. Go watch Douglas McIntyre. He was a boy that was a placement for the girls when they would get pregnant at puberty. And people would wed the girls at puberty. It's not purity, it's rape. Purity is where energies, feminine, masculine, aligned. Even the Egyptians, when they reached that gnosis, they had to release the slaves. That's why they built the pyramids. The Indians, they have a Shiva and Shakti. And here's the thing about the caste system. It's different where the caste system is hierarchic. If I think I would be considered third from top, which is clergy and merchants. If I take a look at what is being, clergy and merchants, okay, I look at the plant. Because merchant is also the medicine, and religion is also the medicine. I look at the plant. I go around the street and I contemplate. So it stems from my environment and it comes to renovate my environment. So my environment is not lower class than me. It's the people that those philosophies and religions are supposed to serve their well-being. And also mine. I'm a part of my environment. And what's happening, let's say, at the kingdom is affecting all of us. Because if people are going to do this timeline like they did previous timeline, they're going to say, oh, let's all be Catholic because the Catholics survived the Easter. And I say that in Netherlands. It's one route. But honoring the feminine and changing the scriptures and denouncing the scriptures that dishonor the feminine can get an actual alternative, because the Calvinism was not going the mile. They died, they were complacent with witch hunts. And they were hunted. They were. Now, what is complacent? Of course, they were tortured. But in a society, women lived, if they already bothered to change the scripture, and they would already have fights over this, which means people were tortured, people crucified, people died. Because what the Catholics, what they want to put the person on a cross, but upside down, and say it's a saint, and say they came back to religion. Or Mary Magdalene was repentant whore. But Mary Magdalene also did not talk about salvation being torture. And the notion of, even I go to the notion of heaven. People are afraid they will go to hell, or they will go to heaven, or this or that. It's only because they feel unworthy of love. And where they had to do crime, and this is where, when we pinpointed on the society that generates criminals, and it generates criminals by rape and torture. Most crimes that people did they're not connected to rape and torture, can be resolved at court. Yeah, that person, that, you question the two sides, eventually you see, yeah, that person wanted this, but they were ashamed to say, and they knew that they, or they wanted that, but they didn't think that they could have, I don't know, money or promotion, or I don't know. Or they had an issue that, and then you find out that nobody was understanding one another. And this is the place of jurisdiction. But where the place of occultistic rape, this has to be abolished by society, because even a Mary Magdalene, she wrote about the gnosis and everything. But when it came to the torture or salvation, torture is not salvation. Human sacrifice is not promoting humanity, but bringing doom. And because the children that were sacrificed, or the children that were dead, were not alive to tell, and the children that would communicate with the spirit would be immediately tortured, because they wanted this communication only under whether it's church or whatnot. But these are testimonies regarding occultistic rape that's done on real estate, that affects the frequency when a child walks into a church or synagogue. And I already say church because it all compounds to the cross. But it's true. Now, if we look at the practices, baptizing of an infant is way better than genitalia mutilation. But if in all of this we have weddings at puberty, then it's not purity, but depopulation. And then people try to have a population boom that will sustain the depopulation. It won't. To kill 100 people and to kill 100,000 people and to kill 100 million people is just the press of a button today. I'm going to say it again. To kill 100 people, or to kill 100,000 people, and to kill 100 million people is the press of a button today. Better honor the feminine. Of course, people cannot have relationships where their life mission together, or the individual life mission supports one another and so on. And those are the successful relationships, because you think, why ever would anybody go through these hurdles with anybody? Only if there is a bigger picture. Only that bigger picture can sustain and say, okay, this thing that, let's say, needs to change in society, or this thing that is a contribution to, I don't know, the sciences or whatnot, where both are sovereign equal. Only that can sustain. And that's not reserved to the Egyptian kings, because the monarchy can't have it if the people can't have it. It would be outthrown. It would lose mandate of the heaven. And if people can't have it, if the monarchies don't, if the rulers don't get it, which is what we saw in COVID. A lot of people, all the worries of the people, my privacy, I can't move without this, I can't move without that, I can't go anywhere without a mask, so neither can your governor. But who would protect them? Neither can the wealth families. Well, they gained by wealth, but the wealth by loot and others. Well, not. What is the key concept to that? All of them degraded the feminine. Within even. Or grew into the gradation of the feminine. And had to grow out of the gradation of the feminine. And then also the fifth vital signs, they become not pleasurable. So when people have difficulty even with the fifth vital sign, and it's common around societies where there's no honoring of the feminine. We saw when people were beginning to look and touch for the excretion or the blood was feeding the soil and the plants, rather than people say, oh, it's a biological hazard. Well, in the concentration camps, there was no fifth vital sign. All of the people there were biological hazard. The land they can transmute, and the excretion is clear when the land is clear. That also means when women had their own land. The practice of these women around the wartime was to prevent a war, would give their fifth vital sign, okay, the moon days, they would give it to the soil. They said it needs this blood and not that blood. And what is this blood? It's the blood of the children that are not born.